There it is. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Answering Common Questions and Addressing Misconceptions on Carnegie's Leadership Classification, or the Classification for Leadership for Public Purpose. But I get tripped on that name a lot, so I'll say LPP or Leadership Classification to make it easier. I would like also to start the captions, show them. Can everyone see those captions? Yeah, great. So let's get started. I'd love to hear where everyone is from. So if you could put in the chat where you're joining us from, I'd love to see that as we get started. First, I will make some quick introductions on who's talking to you all today. I am Carla Ortega-Santori. I am the Strategic Initiatives Manager at Rice University, and about 90% of my job is this classification. So I was involved in its inception in 2019, 2020. We started working on this. So I've been involved with the design and execution of this classification from its beginning. And I'm happy to still be working on this today and managing the classification from the Doerr Institute for New Leaders at Rice University. And with me today is Dr. David Day. David.
Hey, everyone. David Day here from the Kravis Leadership Institute at Claremont McKenna College. I've been involved in this initiative pretty much since the get-go because I also have the privilege of being a fellow at the Doerr Institute. So I've been able to see this evolve from the pilot phase now into the full application phase, and it's great to see the enthusiasm and the commitments really ramping up about this initiative. So that's all from me for now.
That's perfect. What I'd like to say is that this webinar will be recorded, so I will be sharing that with anyone who registered, and it will be available in our website and the Carnegie Elective Classifications website. So you'll have access to that if you have to drop or if you know someone that couldn't join today. Please, we will be answering some of the common questions and misconceptions throughout this webinar. But if you have other questions that we don't get to or that you think of while we talk, please submit those using the chat function. Janine here is joining us, and she'll be monitoring through that, and she'll let me know if something timely should be answered. If not, I'll answer it when we are done with the first part of the webinar. And please mute your audio for the time being, but after we've kind of gone through the common questions and misconceptions, I'd love to hear from all of you. So I'll start with kind of a brief overview of the classification and what leadership for public purpose is, and then we'll get to the common questions and misconceptions. All right, so the Carnegie Elective Classification for Leadership for Public Purpose is a way for colleges and universities to examine how they develop leaders. So the elective classifications, if you don't know, were created to gather information that isn't really covered in the universal Carnegie classification, which is the system that designates the R1s, R2s, etc. It's a self-study that looks at everything the institution does to develop leaders, including policies, assessments, curricular programming, co-curricular programming, etc. Everyone involved in the institution has to work together. So when I say everyone involved, is everyone that does anything leadership related has to work together to answer an application. And then applications are evaluated by trained reviewers who will recommend to award or not award the classification or the designation. It is awarded by the Carnegie Foundation, and it is a way for institutions to show how they are fulfilling this mission to develop leaders. The process is meant to help the institution improve and celebrate efforts to develop leaders, and It is a really comprehensive process. If you're familiar with the CE classification or the community engagement classification, then it's a similar process and framework, except it's rooted and focused on leadership for public purpose instead of community engagement. Now that we understand what this elective classification is, I'd love to delve deeper into the meaning of leadership for public purpose. So let's talk about how we're defining that with the Carnegie Foundation. All right, so some context on this definition. It was built in collaboration with the Carnegie Foundation to capture the variety of activity that can be considered leadership, education, and development in higher education. So effective leadership for public purpose means that a leader is not just focused on their own personal or organizational goals, but also on how their actions and decisions can benefit society as a whole. This type of leadership is committed to promoting public goods such as justice, equity, diversity, and liberty, rather than those just advancing those career or organizational outcomes like getting promoted or meeting a quarterly goal, etc. LPP can also be manifest in all realms of social life. You don't need a school of public policy to see leadership for public purpose on your campus. It can be present in private business, public and nonprofit institutions, neighborhood and community life, professional associations, civil and government institutions, religious institutions, etc. There really is no limit to where this can be seen. And in this definition, we refrain from using one model of leadership because we don't really need to be prescriptive. Instead, we want to learn how you're approaching leadership on your campus. So regardless of what approach you take, you could be taking a social change model approach. You could be looking at a social action. Oh, I always forget it. It's SALT. If someone knows it, please put it in the chat. The authentic leadership lens, a holistic approach, or a competency model. What matters is that this approach should produce the same outcomes. And I will walk you through those same outcomes that we're looking for. So let's look at the operational definition of leadership for public purpose. The outcomes should be these, right? Leadership for public purpose requires developing leadership abilities in everyone, not just those in formal leadership roles. This includes students, faculty, and staff. And evidence of that could include things like leadership development opportunities for staff and faculty, or leadership programs for students in all majors and disciplines. LPP also involves contributing to the broader understanding of leadership as a public good. So evidence of this could include things like faculty research on leadership as it relates to social justice, or maybe individual differences related to leadership or leading. And how this knowledge is used within the institution and beyond, right? Because it's not enough that we just produce this knowledge or this research. How is that being used within and beyond the institution is really important too. And third, LPP means preparing students for lives of leadership. So to be effective leaders, not just in their careers, but in their communities and society as a whole. So evidence of this could include partnerships with community organizations that allow students to apply their leadership skills in like real world settings, or maybe it's evidence of that impact through assessments. There's a whole section on assessment. So that would be a good place for evidence of that. Ultimately, the approach or framework that your university uses should produce the results you see on the screen. So that's what the classification is, what LPP is, what those outcomes should look like in every institution. I hope that sets the stage for these common questions and misconceptions. And when we're talking about common questions and misconceptions, it's things that I've gathered from recent conferences, even registrations for this webinar, and just questions that pop up, pretty commonly. So let's start with the first one. And this is the biggest one. So I dedicated a whole slide to it. The most common question that I get is, what are the benefits? Because everyone is looking at, you're looking at me with those big eyes after seeing all the sections, all the questions. And that makes complete sense, because we want to know the why. Why go through this whole process? Why commit resources to this? Why commit my time? I don't have enough time, Carla. Why would I do this? The benefits vary, but I'd like David to answer this first, and I'll add other observations for applicants. But David, Claremont McKenna is going through the process of applying. You were part of the pilot institution. What are benefits that you've observed at Claremont McKenna?
Well, some days you got to wonder, because we all have day jobs. There's no separate staff for this. I've agreed to kind of be on point because I'm a director of a leadership institute at the college. But it's really a matter of it's an important initiative for our college because responsible leadership is in the mission. That said, no one here has a definition of responsible leadership. And that's one of the things that we want to try to get some clarity around by engaging in this self-study and continuous improvement initiative. And I think that's really where the benefits are. If you're looking for something to receive a certificate or a classification, hang it on the wall somewhere and be done, that's not what this is about. Because if you're so lucky as to receive the classification, you will be undergoing repeated renewals on that classification. So it really is a longer term commitment. But for our particular purposes here at a small liberal arts college, it was really to try to get an understanding of where the various pockets, where the various investments around leadership and leadership development are and are not. One of the more difficult things, and we'll have a chance to talk about some of the bigger challenges in the application, is not the student part, but really the faculty and the staff part. How are they rewarded for leadership and leadership development? And quite frankly, there's some big gaps there, which is another benefit, believe it or not, is that you find out where there are gaps in your kind of overarching strategy around leadership on your campus. But the ultimate, the bottom line, there's got to be a commitment to leadership at your institution, and that commitment needs to be reinforced by people at the top.
Yes, I would. And you're right. It's the benefits that you kind of grab onto are so related to the why you decide to engage in this in the first place. And you're right in that looking at, this whole exercise on self-assessment and self-study is very valuable, because as you look through these programs, policies, you identify areas for improvement and alignment. Like, we say we're developing leaders and we're so focused on this, but staff and faculty are not supported on this. How can we make that better? Other things that I've heard are this framework can offer a common language, right, for folks to talk on campus about this. It can help facilitate planning, data gathering. It can foster more collaboration between this team of people that you form to take on this application. So faculty, staff, students, the team at Rice that I'm not a part of because that would be a conflict of interest, but the team at Rice that's putting together the application has, staff, faculty, they have a student on their team. So there's common language across those groups. Other things that I've
Let
heard.
me jump in for a
say
second.
something?
Can I just jump in for a second? Because you hit on an important point, which is the process of community building as part of the application itself. Ideally, you're bringing people together, whether it's a formal team or a more informal team, who have this, for lack of a better word, passion for leadership development on campus. And it's an opportunity to then build a community that can help move forward this vision, this mission around leadership, and bring people together who otherwise weren't really connected, and doing so around an important aspect of the college or university, which is, how do we actually support leadership and leadership development here?
Yes, and if not for that, you can at least get this team together, this community together, and really appreciate me for being the mastermind behind this application and putting you all through this. No, I'm kidding. But yes, it does help for a common goal, something in common to be working towards, because it's different when you have to work towards this and have this framework as a guide instead of just getting together for getting together's sake and talking about, how leadership is being handled on campus. And those discussions and those meetings are always a catalyst for change. You'll see where areas of improvement are showing up, and it could lead to, if you're seeking this classification, I think it'll push you to experiment with new programs, partnerships, approaches to leadership, hopefully new research. I think another thing that is also commonly, cited and that I see in applicants is the recognition that comes with the Carnegie Elective Classification. That's a pretty big thing. People want an increased visibility of the institution. They want to use it in marketing tools, attracting similar or like-minded individuals, staff, faculty, students, even donors that are committed to this criteria or this framework. Also, institutions that are classified can be included in a searchable database of classified institutions. So policymakers, researchers, and others will have access to this information and know that your institution is classified. And you also mentioned reclassification, David. And if you're thinking of reclassification, it can also provide a benchmark for measuring progress over time. So that is another benefit. If anyone here on joining us can think of another benefit that I haven't mentioned, please pop it in the chat. If you've applied for the CE classification and seen other benefits, feel free to include those. And let's see. Oh. Pride points. Yes, Diane. All right. Let's look at another common question, misconception. So these are around alignment and eligibility. So one of the common things that I've heard is we don't have a dedicated center or program for LPP. So we might actually not be eligible for the classification. And while that is very common for institutions to not have a dedicated center, institute, or program for LPP or leadership development or leadership education, that doesn't necessarily exclude you from being able to receive the classification. So it is important in the application to explain whatever current infrastructure you have of the institution and how different centers or offices coordinate and communicate. So are there, clear responsibilities around what each center or office does, and what this question or this section looks to answer is really to demonstrate how the institution is putting the commitment into action, even if there is not a single, center or program that oversees everything. And those detailed descriptions just really help reviewers understand how the institution is structured and how it supports leadership development as it currently stands. So one of the most common tendencies that we saw throughout the pilot was that there was no one center or or center that oversaw everything leadership related. Yeah, it is a very common misconception that you have to have only one center or office that oversees it all, but that is not necessarily the case for you to be eligible.
Can I jump in for a second, Carla? And
Yes.
enforce that? I mean, even though we have a leadership institute here on campus, it's one of 11 research institutes, and it's not the central clearinghouse for everything leadership related in terms of faculty, staff, or students. And it's been made pretty clear by the president of the college, it will not be the central clearinghouse for leadership on campus. So, but that's an important, I think, discussion point. Do you want to have a central dedicated center for leadership initiatives on your campus, or can you operate in a somewhat decentralized, distributed way and still meet the goals for having reinforced leadership for public purpose, or whatever your version of that on campus is? And that's another point I wanted to emphasize that Carla mentioned, which is you don't have to use that definition or that term of leadership for public purpose on your campus. So for us, it's responsible leadership. And we just made the case early on in the application that what we are calling responsible leadership fits within the Carnegie classification of leadership for public purpose. So you don't have to shoehorn that terminology in order to be eligible for the classification.
That is a great clarification, David, because I think early on in the application, one of the things that is asked is, how do you see your definition or your approach to leadership? How does that align to the Carnegie Foundation's definition of LPP? And you're right, you don't have to use that term on your campus. You just have to understand where the similarities are and what the differences are. So thank you. That's actually really helpful. One of the other misconceptions that I've heard, or comments that I've heard, worries are, I am actually at a really large university. Efforts are way too scattered. There's no possible way that I could gather all that information in order to receive the classification. And you know what? You're right. It is a comprehensive process, but it will allow you to look really closely at programs and initiatives. And I think you'll see a lot more alignment within the institution than you expected, probably. And while it may seem daunting to gather and analyze all that data, but the process can ultimately lead to probably greater coherence across campus. I mean, imagine sitting down with every stakeholder on campus that is doing this work. It will jumpstart conversations. You'll notice potential collaborations. Possibilities are endless. Maybe you'll discover better ways to coordinate and communicate across the university. I've heard many different things. It's also important to note that institutions don't have to include every single detail for every single program or initiative in their application for the classification. I mean, you do have to include all relevant evidence of your commitment to LPP, so reviewers can see that evidence and kind of understand the story that you're telling. But one way to tackle this challenge is to make a plan with your team after the initial conversations about the classification. This could involve breaking up the application into more manageable pieces, assigning specific data collection tasks, establishing, clear deadlines, some basic project management to help you complete the application and keep everyone on track. And I think this feeling of not being able to put your arms around it is similar at every institution. At a large public institution, it may feel even harder, but it's not impossible. If you want to learn how a large public institution is kind of attempting to do this, Fort Hays State University, we had Donette Noble from Fort Hays University speak at one of our webinars in the past months, and you can browse the webinar recording where she talks more about how she built the team and how she's tackling the application more in a more detailed way. So check out our webinar recordings on that so you can take a look at how she's attempting to do that. And She's also really accessible, so you can ask her questions about how she's doing it on her campus. Let's see, another one is I'm at a small college and we actually don't have a big budget for LPP. David, since you are at a smaller college, how would you react to this?
I don't think anybody has a big budget for LPP, actually. So, small college, large college, whatever. Let me say one thing about the large public university. If you're at one of those comprehensive universities and how you might start getting a handle around leadership for public purpose, I would encourage you to first reach out to your professional schools, your business school, your law school, your medical school, if you have those, because that's where you're going to find attention being paid to leadership and leadership development. I think more so than the arts and humanities and so forth. So those three big professional schools are usually pockets of some understanding of leadership. Now, how well they're aligned and how well that spreads to other parts of the campus, that's a question to be determined. Another place where I've seen leadership and student leadership development played out are in honors colleges. So if you have an honors college, that's another one to look to see if there's some attention being given to student leadership development there. So it's really a matter of data gathering. I mean, if you're a researcher like myself, this is the fun part about gathering data and looking at how well things connect and how well things align as a starting spot to try to get your hands around the size of the place that you're trying to understand. And that's really, I think, the ultimate goal is to understand how leadership and leadership development are being done or not being done at your particular institution. So in a small college, there are some advantages. I mean, we have two. One, responsible leadership is in the mission of the college. And two, we only have about 1,300 students. But it's still the case that there's no one place on campus where it's the clearinghouse for leadership. So it's really about trying to identify where these pockets are, how they talk about or enact or deliver leadership and leadership development, and then trying to put those together in some sort of coherent narrative that would translate to the application. But in terms of budget, I don't think that's really a reasonable expectation that you'll just be given a budget. But I think if you have the support from people in senior leadership, the provost level, at the presidential level, if you need budget, then you can request it if you already have the support of senior leadership. And we have enthusiastic support for the initiative on my campus. We don't have a separate budget for it. I'm pretty much on point using the resources through our Leadership Institute to gather the data and engage with other stakeholders around campus. But if I needed additional budget, I would not hesitate to put together a proposal and go to someone in senior leadership and ask for those funds because they've made the commitment that they want to see this happen. So getting that commitment, I think, can open the door to getting resources that you need. But I don't think it's necessarily the case that they're just going to say, here's a budget for you to do this.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's
realistic expectations,
No, that resonates with a lot of people, I'm sure, here joining us. And I'll say if the budget is a concern when you're even answering the application, when you get to the part of the budget and you say, oh, well, but I don't have a budget for this. The budget is just one question of the application and a really small part of the story you're trying to tell reviewers, right? The picture you're trying to paint. And even figuring out the budget that exists throughout the campus is part of understanding how you're allocating resources, like David was saying. And institutions of all sizes can participate in this process. So
So
the criteria. Yeah.
Yeah, I was speaking mainly to the process of completing the application and a budget for that. But it's also the case that there's no central budget for leadership at this campus,
Yeah.
even at a very small college. But let me give you an example of how we try to address this issue of, how much of an investment there is at a curricular level for leadership for public purpose on this campus. And I ended up having a conversation with our treasurer, our vice president of finance around that. And she had a really insightful and innovative approach, which is, okay, let's look at the courses that count for our leadership sequence. So our leadership sequence is an equivalent of a minor. So what are the courses that somehow count for this particular minor sequence formal designation that goes on a transcript? Or, if you don't have that, what are the classes that you can identify as leadership related classes? And we estimated what the investments of the college were by taking all of the courses that are offered, divided by the institutional resources devoted to those courses. And we came up with an average, and this is an interesting factoid, an average cost in terms of institutional support and related expenses of $75,000 per course that's offered at Claremont McKenna College. So we then looked at how many courses are offered over the course of a year as part of our sequence, and that was around 30. So now we have an estimate of over $2 million in terms of an institutional investment in curricular leadership activities. So it wasn't just something that, I went to and found in a budgetary line item somewhere. You have to think kind of creatively about how are resources allocated, especially on the curricular side of things. And one of those is to look at, well, how many courses do you have that are leadership related? And then what's the average cost per offering, and doing the maths.
That is so interesting. I didn't know that, David. And you wouldn't have figured that out. I mean, you wouldn't have thought of that if it wasn't for this process.
I didn't figure it out. Our vice president of finance figured it out.
Right.
And
those conversations were, because of this. So that's
extremely
helpful.
Extremely helpful.
I'm going to need that information to include in some resources. No, that's super interesting. Thank you. Let's see other common questions that people have. So when we're talking about completing the application, one question is, every question has a 500-word limit, and people are either intimidated by all of that, blank space to fill, or they're freaking out because how can I include all of our accomplishments, all of our experiences, all that data in that limited space of a short answer? David, how did you approach that?
Well, sometimes 500 words is daunting when you look at a lot of white space in the entry, but that's good data in and of itself. It's been my experience that there's only a few that you had more to say than the 500 words could aptly characterize. So you have to make some, choices. And, we don't, I believe the application doesn't allow any URLs or hyperlinks or anything like that. It's got to be in that actual text box. But, you can abbreviate, you can bullet point things, you can, you don't have to do a full narrative discussion of everything, and hit the highlights. So more often than not, it was seeing those particular entries where there were a couple of entries and another 400 words that I had to work with, or we had to work with, and that should prompt some reflection and discussion about, okay, clearly there doesn't seem to be a lot here. Where do we go in order to kind of beef this up? And that's an important part of the application process. I don't think anybody is going to knock it out of the park and have all of these various questions across a 35 plus page application nailed down, and nor is that the purpose. But you identify where we need to invest more, where we need to do more. And as part of the application, you talk about what's in discussion, what's in planning, or it's in preparation, or, quite frankly, what we haven't discussed yet, but we need to.
Yes.
But I don't think for the most part, people are going to be running out of room on the various responses on the application. It's more the other way.
You'd be surprised, David. Let's see.
Okay, well, you're right. Okay, I'm looking forward to being surprised.
No, but yes, I think I think staying clear and concise will help. Like you said, specific, concrete examples, highlighting, the outcomes and impacts, anything that relates back to that criteria that we were talking about at the very start.
And I think it's also the case that if you have more that you can't fit in that you say so. And just say, the space limitations don't allow us to elaborate on these other initiatives, and maybe just have a abbreviated bullet point list about what else would fall under that particular question or category.
Yes, and there is one question at the very end that allows for anything that wasn't asked or couldn't be included in any other question, so that you can elaborate. But yeah, I think clear and concise is the way. Remember, reviewers are human, so we want to be clear and concise for them. The other question that I've received is, what should I do if I can't provide a response? I don't have answers to this question. There's no program in place to answer for this. What would I say? I would say, first, we do not encourage to leave a question blank. If you don't have an answer, it's really important to be transparent and explain why the evidence doesn't exist. You can, like David was saying, you can highlight what the campus is doing to be able to provide the evidence in the future. So it can include any ongoing or planned initiatives, collaborations, research that could help build all this evidence. You can also provide a detailed, concrete plan for how the institution plans to address this, including a timeline, resources needed, describing the strategies that will be employed, anything that will give reviewers an idea of, you've figured out, we don't have an answer for this. You're addressing it or plan to address it, and these are the concrete plans. It'll help them get a better idea of how you're planning to handle this in the future. It's also really important to, oh yeah, David.
There are some areas in the application where it just, we struggled with, because, for example, we talk about faculty tenure and promotion, and how does leadership for public purpose relate to that? Outside of any kind of scholarship that would relate to leadership for public purpose, it's a very difficult thing to say, we have certain requirements that faculty have to meet for tenure and promotion around leadership for public purpose. And I think we can, and we have said, we just kind of have a philosophical difference about including leadership for public purpose in promotion and tenure standards, given how different the various departments and schools are.
Yes, and I mean, it's important to know that our framework resembles very closely the CE framework. That's a framework that has been established for over a decade. They've had multiple cycles. They've had opportunities to improve on every cycle. They didn't start out with all these sections, at the very start. So we are recreating that framework, but we understand it will be a process while the field kind of catches up to all of this criteria too. So even including those conversations and those discussions, the philosophical, reasonings behind it that David is mentioning is really important. It's really important to note that there is no one question that is a litmus test. So it's okay to not have all the answers, because the process of seeking out these answers and working towards addressing the gaps is a really important part of this developmental process. Great. So let's talk about the review process now. One question that I get asked is, how will applications be evaluated? Well, each application will be evaluated individually and reviewed holistically. So a reviewer will read your entire application. The review process is based on a peer review system. So this means that each application will be evaluated by 2 to 3 reviewers who have been trained and selected by our team. Reviewers will be chosen based on their experience and their expertise and experience in the field, and will be required to have knowledge, related to the classification framework and its criteria. Each application, like I said, will be assessed based on its overall individual quality, so no benchmarking or comparisons will be made necessarily. Another thing that I've been asked about the review process is, what are some key data points that reviewers will be looking for? Well, I'll say that reviewers will be looking for evidence broadly of the institution's commitment to LPP. And that really can be summed up really nicely with the operational definition. So I'm going to have us look at that again. Here it is. The operational definition highlights 3 things, right? Developing all stakeholders, contributing to the broader understanding of leadership, and preparing students for lives of leadership in society. Reviewers will be looking through all the sections really to see evidence of these things in your application. So a myriad of data points could help paint this picture. But I think the sections that reviewers will be paying attention to are section 3, 4, and 5, because they they will try to understand through those sections your overall institutional commitment. Section 6 and 7, which talk about HR policies, procedures, etc., will be used to understand how staff and faculty are being developed and supported. Section 8 on assessment will be used to understand how outcomes are being assessed. I did that like an automatic beta thing, and it recognizes my hand signals. I'm sorry, I wasn't thumbs upping. Anyways, so that's section 8. They'll use section 8 to understand how outcomes are being assessed. Section 10 and 11 are curriculum and co-curriculum. So those will be used to understand how students are being developed. And then section 13 will be used to understand how knowledge is being produced. Now, I know I just gave you a rundown of the entire application. And reviewers, yes, will be looking at the whole thing. I can't say one specific data point that will be looked at or one specific section, because all of them will be looked at, jointly. No one question will be a litmus test. So I think, yes, there could be some, concerns that would be raised for reviewers if you have no leadership courses or no co-curricular programming. But I think they'll be looking at how all of this evidences that commitment to LPP.
Yeah, let me echo that and say, I think you're right. There's no one question that's going to be kind of the touchstone in all of this. I think, and this is just my opinion, it's really about making the case for having, and I'll use some business school speak here, a coherent strategy for designing and delivering leadership for public purpose on your campus. So can the reviewer see the coherence behind the strategy for doing this across stakeholders? And is the institution aware where there are gaps in this strategy that they need to address? Would you say that's a fair enough assessment, Carla?
Yes, that's a very fair assessment. Thank you, David. Yes, I think coherence is key because, and even for me, as I was reading through pilot applications, because it was a very core team of reviewers, it is hard to understand the whole picture, if things feel disjointed or if coherence is not evident. So I think, yes, looking for that coherence is going to be key for reviewers. Well, I hope our answers have clarified things. I think we encourage really applicants to provide as much relevant evidence and data as possible to support the application and ensure that, the application is comprehensive and detailed as possible. Again, painting this narrative, constructing this narrative or painting this picture for reviewers.
Yeah, and regardless of the outcome, every application will get pretty detailed feedback, correct, Carla?
Yes. Yes. And I think the CE application is going through the same thing where they are planning to provide feedback for all applicants, even if you don't receive the classification. So we will be modeling that same approach to that. And we did that for the pilot. And I think it was one of the most beneficial parts of going through the pilot application.
Given that we are all at institutions of higher learning, I think there's shared value around learning, and I think making the case that your particular institution can be a keener learning organization by engaging in this process of basically self-study, a commitment to continuous improvement, and reviewing and acting on the feedback you get. I mean, those are the hallmarks, I think, of a learning organization, and it's a learning organization around leadership.
Yes, and the entire framework of the Carnegie Foundation is this idea of continuous improvement. So it really makes sense for us to close the circle on that and close the feedback loop. Well, I hope these answers have been helpful. If these answers have helped you demystify the classification and you're interested in applying for the 2024 cycle, these are the next steps. So first, review our resources, and Janine's going to share them in a few minutes or in a few seconds. Review our resources because we have webinar recordings, guides, resource libraries. Second, I would download a PDF of the application so that you can get an idea of what the questions are, what data will be needed. Third, I think building a team is going to be essential, figuring out what the stakeholders on campus are doing, leadership, education, and development, student affairs, office of the president, HR, build your team to be able to tackle this application. Identifying what data you're going to need is going to be helpful too. And then number 5, and this is the most important part, is initiating your application by July 1st. There is an intent to apply deadline. So institutions have initiated their applications or purchased it on GivePulse by July 1st to be able to apply this year. And you will be able to edit and submit your application until December of this year. So you have some time yet to get that data together.
There's a question in the chat about whether from Marianne Wood about whether there'll be a yearly application process. Can you address that?
Marianne, the next cycle would be open on 2024, and then you would be awarded the classification in 2026.
What about if they do not choose to apply this round? Is there, when will it reopen again for new applications? 26?
Yeah, in 2024 applications would open and then they would be awarded in 2026. Does that make sense?
No, because
so we are currently, I know it's.
What if they don't apply this year? When is
yeah.
the next opportunity going to be to apply?
It's counterintuitive, but this year is the 2024 cycle because it's awarded in 2024.
Okay, but what if they don't apply? When can they do it next?
Then they can apply in 2024 and receive it in 2026.
Oh, got it. Okay, I'm slow with the uptake here. Yes, got it. My bad.
No, but it's counterintuitive. The years are counterintuitive, okay, yeah. But that's how it works.
Well, now I know.
Yes.
Let me say, can I say one other thing about the team? And yes. When you look at the application, it's daunting. There's a lot of information that's being requested, but if you can somehow divide and conquer, because obviously people in the Dean of Students office aren't going to be able to answer things around staff development. The people in HR aren't going to be able to address issues around faculty or students. So not everybody on the team is going to have relevant information for every aspect or every section of the application. So using a kind of a divide and conquer strategy makes it a bit more manageable.
Yeah, it really does. You don't have to be the person that gathers all the data, breaking it up into pieces and understanding who's going to help you and what is really going to be helpful. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can look at everyone, and I'll take a look at the chat. Let's see. All right, so Fran, would you recommend institutions keep the LPP and community engagement self-studies completely separate, or do you see opportunities for these two self-studies to be coordinated? That's a question that we're exploring with the elective classifications team writ large, and even exploring maybe a way for schools to pull the same data for an application. That's years away though. So what I would say is we have a resource on the elective classifications webpage that Janine shared the link to that compares the CE and LPP framework. So that might help you understand if there are any alignments at your institution that would benefit from maybe a joint effort. But each one is a pretty comprehensive process. So I would say look out for burnout in the people on your team, and be considerate of the bandwidth really that they're able to work with. So I haven't gone through two at once, so I can't really say from experience, but maybe understanding which one is a priority first could help you, or even looking at that table that I mentioned could help you see if there are many alignments at your institution. Does that help, Fran? Thank you. Yes. Okay. Martinella, about how long should we plan to gather information and fill out the form? This really depends. So we had a pilot institution that had a accreditation process kind of happen pretty parallel to the application process. So they were able to use a lot of that information in their application, and it took them, I think, a month maybe to complete their application, but that is not everyone's case. David, how long did you plan for that in your campus?
Well, we were one of them that had accreditation going on at the same time. So we benefited from that. It depends on how centralized things are or how decentralized things are. So it's hard to say exactly how long it will take, because you have to build the network first to be able to access the data that's likely to reside in various parts of the campus. So how quickly can you build that network? How much cooperation can you get from your colleagues? And again, this comes back to how much support you can claim from the top. It's amazing how receptive people will be, like your vice president of finance, if you say, by the way, the president is very enthusiastic about this initiative. And suddenly we have an audience and we have a helpful response. And so, you leveraging the commitment from senior leadership on this opens a lot of doors. But, you need to get that first before you start building your network. The network then gets allows you into the data. And quite frankly, some things are going to come relatively easy, the low-hanging fruit, and other things are, perhaps going to take, weeks or months to try to figure out a strategy on how to get that information and how to report it effectively. So it's hard. It's not, I don't think it's possible to say it's going to be this amount of time and not that amount of time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Building the team is probably the part that takes up the most time, figuring out who will help you gather all this data and getting buy-in from other stakeholders. So
Diane had a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, it took us about 9 or 10 months. And one of the challenges was that we had so much turnover on our team.
Yeah.
So if you can build bigger teams, that probably makes sense, because we had some of our key players on the team leave the institution. So I would urge you. And also, we started out with a gigantic spreadsheet that we just sent to all the stakeholders and asked them to fill it in after a community meeting explaining what we were doing. And we did not get strong responses. So I would do that differently if I were to go back and do it. In fact, I would now assign people to different sections and just have them go and interview the people who have the information. I think people would much rather do that than have to sit down and write a response when they're not exactly sure what the purpose is or what you need to hear from them. So I think more targeted questions and a real conversation where someone from the team is taking notes, and then you have a kind of more unified voice and more unified goals.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. People kind of get a little touchy when you ask them about budgets, for example. However, make a friend of your people in the finance office, because they can tell you what the budgeted expenses are for whatever unit you're interested in. And this is how I got information about a couple of an accurate assessment of what our budgeted expenses are for the Leadership Institute, as well for another leadership lab on campus, as well as something else that's related to leadership for public purpose. So you don't have to go directly to the directors and ask them about budgets, which you might get pushback. But if you go to someone who's in a centralized place like finance, they can share that information with you, because it should be, it should be publicly available to people on campus.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. And Diane was part of our pilot at Simmons University, so she's already gone through this process and kind of going through it again. Thanks, Diane. Will reviewers reach out to the applicant if they have a clarifying question? I don't think that'll be the case, Rachel, but it is a new peer review process that the elective classifications team is implementing. So there might be some flexibility on how that process, evolves. But I would assume no, that reviewers will not reach out to applicants as a rule. Will applicants receive feedback from reviewers, Sam? Yes. What you're talking about is that the elective classifications team is implementing this new guideline, I guess, to offer feedback to people that receive or don't receive the classification. All right. Any other questions? If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, Carla. Matt Bowler, Oklahoma State University.
Hi, Matt.
Thank you all, and thank you for helping take my stress level a little bit lower. I have been granted a fellowship by the university, and my first job is to do this application and hopefully do it successfully. As a large land grant institution, I'm quite overwhelmed by this, and thinking about putting my team together, right, and who all and what number that should be. The next thing I'm wondering about is, and this is more of somewhat of a technical question, on the application for us, it asked about a specific campus code, right? So we have our Stillwater campus. That's where the bulk of the institution is, our vet med school, but like our medical school is 60 miles away here in Tulsa. We have a Tulsa campus, which is where my faculty line is at, but my boss is in Stillwater. Like, defining that, what is the university? What is the institution? Is it specifically what that code was, or is it more broadly the medical school, even though it's not co-located? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so, but email me to remind me and I'll give you a more detailed answer.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm glad we reduced your stress levels. That's like 70% of my job is reducing stress levels. So I'm glad.
And if anybody, Diane or anybody else has an idea on, we've got, I think I looked, Fort Hays State has 12,000 students, right? We're approaching 30,000 students, and 8 different colleges, honors college, and then medical school and vet med. It's like, I don't really know, should this committee have 5 people on it? Should I have 10 people? Should it be somebody from every college? You know, I'm trying to wrap my brain around that.
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer because each place is different. Carla, maybe this is a place where you can put in a plug for the higher ed community, people who are engaged in this initiative, where they can reach out to others doing the same thing and maybe identify support mechanisms that way. So
yeah. So one of the links that Janine shared is for Higher Led, our online community, and there is a specific learning community for the classification of people that are applying, where you can interact with people that are either applying or plan to apply. And it's very similar to like a social network where you can ask questions and comment on posts. You can pose a poll or question. So it's really easy to use and interact. And you can connect with people that are going through similar things. We also have kind of drop-in Q&A sessions that might help clarify some of these things. And mostly, yeah, what is most helpful, I think, is speaking to people that are going through the same things and in similar contexts. So thank you, David. And I will say, figuring out the team and how to build your team is a really important part of the process. I encourage you to watch the webinar that we made on building a team, where we talked about even, offices that you might not think of to include in your team, like HR, student affairs, finance, like David was saying, identifying schools that are doing similar things. And all that. And we have a resource that'll help you figure out that.
yeah, another one that you may not think of is institutional research, because they're often involved with student assessments, and that's a part of the application as well. How are some of these outcomes assessed? So getting someone from that office is another helpful piece of the team. But how large the team should be, the literature on teams says that more than 6 or 7, it starts to degrade into chaos. So I would try to keep a focal team of people who are really committed to this classification and to the initiative.
But more than one,
Yeah.
says Diane. Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think a focal team and a larger team would be helpful, but definitely more than one. All right, we're at time, but I'm happy to stay and answer any other questions. If you have to leave, thank you for joining us. I hope this was helpful. And I'd love to see you on Higher Led. We also have, let me quit sharing. We also have an upcoming, the ILA is hosting an upcoming webinar that talks about frameworks and advancing leadership programs using different frameworks. They will also be discussing the Carnegie classification. So if you feel like registering and learning more about that, it'll be in June. And another one of our National Advisory Committee members will be there. So, and thank you all for joining. Nice to see you, Diane. I forgot I had this thing. You go like this and it'll recognize.
Oh my, that's pretty scary, God, artificial intelligence. Maybe we can use AI for the